Hi, everyone. Welcome. I'm your moderator, Anthony Mauro, and this is Dark Horse Comics from page to screen and screen to page. Joining me today is my esteemed group of panelists, David Goodman, who writes the Orville for us, Jody Houser, who writes Critical Role and Stranger Things and a bunch of other things, and Paul Tobin, who has written the Witcher comics for us. He's writing Plants vs. Zombies for us and a whole slew of creator-owned things, including Bandette, Mystery Girl, and Earthboy. Thank you all for joining me today. So to start off, I just want to throw it out to all of you. How did you get into writing?
Well, I always kind of wanted to be a writer, but I didn't know you could be. But college was what got me because I went to college at the University of Iowa.
Okay.
There was a creator that I met there, Phil Hester. So he's still a creator in comics, and I think he and I became basically the only two comic creators in Iowa for a while.
Sure.
But he was already doing like some early comics, and that was the crux for me, was learning that the only thing about doing comics was just to do them. I had sort of believed that you needed to be like live in a specific area in New York within 3 blocks of a publisher, and so Phil was the one that was the catalyst for me for saying, oh no, you just do it. You just start making comics. And that's kind of what happened.
Wow.
That's awesome. David, Jody?
No, Jody, let Jody.
Yeah, Jody, by all means.
I actually decided I wanted to be a writer when I was 8 years old because it was the first thing anyone ever told me I was good at. So obviously that's, what you do for the rest of your life then. Mm-hmm. But I didn't really consider comics because, in school I read novels and plays. So I thought that's just, as a writer, you had to do one of those things. I didn't necessarily consider TV is written by people and movies and comics. So I, years later, after I'd gotten my master's degree and moved out to LA, I started doing webcomics just so I had something that I was writing that I could put out on a regular basis. And I found I really liked it. I ended up joining a couple comic anthologies that were kickstarted. And it was just such a fantastic experience working with someone who could actually draw for once, that I decided to keep going. And that's how I got to where I am today.
Very cool.
I'm mostly a television writer. And so when I graduated college, I didn't study writing in college. And I don't know that I had the confidence to know that I wanted to be a writer. I never said it out loud because I thought somebody would say you can't. So I worked for a television production company and sort of learned about how you become a television writer, which I had an interest in doing, and I had a writing partner at the time, and we wrote a couple of sample episodes of sitcoms. We thought comedy was our way into the business, and we got hired. I got hired on The Golden Girls as a writer back in 1988, and then I stayed a writer, obviously this whole time, and have slowly over the years started doing other kinds of writing, books, and then finally with the Orville comic books, which is something I always wanted to do.
Your first show that you wrote was for Golden Girls?
I was a writer on that staff. It wasn't my show. But I got hired on that show. Yeah.
I mean, that's right. A great place to
that's
start.
A cool start.
It's a great start. I know. I was like, we're not going to just blow over that one. We're going to come back to that.
It's a story. It's a great story. I was 25. My partner was 23. We got hired. Heady experience to be on a top 10 TV show. That show, which was so amazing. And then a year and a half later, we were fired. So it's a great story, and it's also a horrifying story. So both those things.
Right.
I never got to work on Golden Girls, so.
Now I want to know what a Golden Girls comic book would look like.
Yeah, I went there too, Jody. That would be fun.
I think, Disney owns it, so you'd have to go through Disney. So.
Hey, Disney, give us a license.
Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. Are there specific episodes that are credited to you on the Golden Girls that people at home should go watch after this panel?
There is my first credit first television credit was an episode called The Impotence of Being Earnest. And Rose is dating a man who is impotent. And it's, I don't know if this is a family audience I'm talking to. I'm not going to explain what that is if you don't know what it is. And
Ask your parents' kids.
It was played by Richard Hurd, who, if you're a geek, Richard Hurd played T.J. Hooker's boss on T.J. Hooker. He also played Tom Paris's father on Star Trek Voyager. Great guy. Anyway, that's the one I'm credited on. Yeah.
Your origin story is the best, Ben. You win.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, for real. Well, that's the panel, everybody. No. Well, I guess dovetailing out of that, you have each written and adapted work from other mediums, from shows, from movies, from video games. How were you approached, David, to write the Orville comics, Paul to write The Witcher, Plants vs. Zombies, Prometheus, Jody, Critical Role, Stranger Things, and what made you excited to work on those properties in particular?
Well, I'm one of the writers with Seth MacFarlane of the Orville, and when he sold that show, I said we have to have a comic. So that it was driven by us, and he was absolutely on board with that, and he we went to the studio. We pushed the studio to go out to comic companies. Dark Horse responded positively about doing an Orville comic, and I said I'm writing it. So it was
perfect.
But that's the result of 30 years as a writer. I had that power to do that at that moment,
right?
Because I'd always wanted to write comics, and as a writer of the show, as one of the writers of the show with Seth, I was in a very good position to adapt it for a comic.
Right. Jody, how about you?
For Stranger Things, I was emailed by the editor Spencer, who asked if I had any interest in writing a Stranger Things comic. I'd worked with him on an issue of Halo before, and my answer was yeah, because I was a fan of the show, like so many people, and that just seemed like a really fun world to get to dive into, and especially the chance to really get to pay homage to other great 80s stories in the comics, like the first series we did, which was called The Other Side and followed Will through the events of season 1. We tried to make it feel like a product of the 80s, that you'd walk into a comic shop back then, or I guess really the newsstand back then, and buy the comics. So it's all like thought bubbles, and the coloring was meant to have that sort of aged look.
Right.
That was just an exciting property to get to work with, because it does have that sort of tone that you get to play with. And as for Critical Role, I actually knew the Critical Role cast because I had done some RPG shows on Geek and Sundry and had met them there.
Right.
So when they were looking for someone to step in, because Matt Colville was who wrote the first miniseries for Vox Machina, basically got so busy with his own business he wasn't able to come back. They reached out to me because they knew I was familiar with the show, I was familiar with them as people, and that I had a long history of working on licensed books. So that was just sort of a right place, right time, know the right people sort of thing.
Right. Paul, how about you? As you take a sip of water, sorry.
Well, for Plants vs. Zombies, the first time I can ever remember knowing about Plants vs. Zombies was on a plane with artist Steve Lieber, and he was playing it on his tablet. And I looked over and I was like, "Well, what's that?" So he showed me, and it seemed kind of cool. And it was the very, very first iteration of Plants vs. Zombies, with literally just a line of plants and a line of zombies meeting. And it became a game that I started to play because it's a very good game for like an interruption while I'm writing, or like
Sure.
my mind starts to fuzz and I can play like some Plants vs. Zombies. And, you know, a game can last like 2 minutes, 3 minutes, and then you get back to work. Whereas if you play, you know, if you go, "Oh, I'm going to go play, you know, Witcher," and then just like 7 hours later, you're like, "Oh, I was going to work today, but I guess that's gone."
Right.
Sure, you were going to work today. Sure.
Yeah.
Guilty of that. Absolutely guilty of that.
So I started playing it like just for a little fun. And then one day I was literally sitting exactly where I'm at right now. And Philip Simone, Dark Horse editor, called me up and I'd been on break and playing Plants vs. Zombies, and he said, "Hey, I wanted to talk to you. Do you know what Plants vs. Zombies is?" And I was like, "I'm literally playing it right now." And he's like, "Oh, would you like to write it?" And I said, "Yeah." But it was like a lot of fun because it was strange because, again, it was just it was the very first iteration. So there was nothing to write. So I got to make up the whole world, which was a blast. And Witcher was another game that I just happened to be playing. And then I talked about it with editor Daniel Chabon, and he said, "Well, we're going to start doing those comics. Do you want that?" And I was like, "Yeah." So, the lesson is screw around, play video games all day long, and that'll be your break.
You heard it here first, kids.
That's the message. That's the message we want to relate.
Yeah, exactly. Play video games and screw around. Everything will work out.
Everything will work out fine.
Yeah. I guess that's actually a great segue, Paul, into working on really high profile game licenses like The Witcher and Plants vs. Zombies. The Witcher being a more established property that you got to play in, and like you just said, PvZ just really being a very bare bones thing at first, and you getting to come in and build that world. So what were those two experiences like working on those properties?
Well, you're right. They were like polar opposites because with Plants vs. Zombies, there wasn't anything. So I had to create the city, the town, the whole world, and side characters. Crazy Dave couldn't talk, but he needed to be a main character. So I invented a niece, Patrice Blazing, who's the only person in the world who actually understands what he says.
Sure.
And things like that. But they gave me all the freedom I needed. They just wanted to have fun. And I was like, "Oh, I can have fun. I grew up reading Mad Magazine. I can do this." So yeah, I just created that whole world. Whereas with Witcher, Andrzej Sapkowski had made 7 novels at that point, and there were already games out. So there wasn't only an abundance of material, there was an overabundance of material.
Right.
So our first series, House of Glass, because we weren't sure how much people would be familiar with The Witcher and his world, we actually just said, "You know what, for the first series, it's Geralt and Geralt only." And we made kind of a haunted house story. No side characters, no politics of the world, no side world. We just like the bare bones as possible as sort of an introduction. So where Plants vs. Zombies was expanding a world, at first Witcher needed to be sort of reducing that world so that there could be people who would take the first step.
Right.
Because it was kind of amazing to me. Like there were 2 games out at that point, and like I said, Andrzej had I think 7 novels at that point, but a sizable amount of the readership of the comic books thought it was a creator-owned book by me. They're like,
right.
"Oh, who created The Witcher?" And I'm like, "I wish, but no."
It's like, thank you. Huge compliment.
Yeah, that would be great. So yeah, it was polar opposite, but it's still the same as like create character and tell story.
Yeah, that's super interesting how you worked kind of, I don't want to say simultaneously, but like very closely on both of those properties. Just the different approaches. It's odd. It's an odd mindset to have to flip between, for sure. Jody, let's switch to you. So you're writing the tie-in comics for Stranger Things, obviously, like you said, that first Stranger Things series, which I adored personally, was about Will's journey in the Upside Down throughout season 1. So when everybody was trying to figure out what happened to him, it's him surviving. And then also, obviously, much beloved Critical Role prequel comics of sorts. It's the pre-stream home game stories of Vox Machina, that first adventuring party from Critical Role, before they made it a show. So what has that been like working on those 2 beloved properties? Both very much steeped in, obviously, like geek and nerd culture of the 80s and now into present day.
Well, with Stranger Things, and I've had this experience with some other projects I've worked on, because it's still an ongoing show. You have to be wary of what stories you're telling, because you don't want to essentially take over anything that's going to be in the main product, which is the TV show.
Right.
That's where the core of the storytelling is. So any ideas you pitch, it could get shot down because we're sort of going to dovetail into that in an upcoming season, something like that. or there's already a novel that's already doing this story that hasn't been announced yet. So it's
Right.
always a little bit tricky finding a place to fit the stories in. So like we got to do Dustin going to summer camp and meeting Susie, which I really enjoyed doing because that was a story that we heard some hints of on the show, but we didn't actually get to see what happened there and how that relationship started. So I love finding the moments like that where this is something that people would like to see, but you know, there's never going to be room for it on the main show.
Right.
And as for Critical Role, that's also a really interesting case because it's a prequel, but it's something that the audience is aware of the events because they've talked about these things. They did a series of sort of animated shorts back in the day that explained all the events that happened before the stream. So I'm taking stories that the audience sort of knows like the summary of and building that out and writing all the dialogue and getting into the detail of it. So it's essentially there's a framework in place and I'm doing everything that's hanging on that. So it's not just a summary of something that happened before, it's an actual story.
Right. Do you feel like there's a freedom within that framework for those Critical Role comics to kind of explore the characters a little bit more, explore those stories a little bit more? Because, you know, they weren't recorded and it's a game at this point that they played years ago. So is there a freedom there to kind of, as long as you're staying true to where the arc goes, to play around a little bit?
I really think there is. I just checked, and in terms of gameplay for the Vox Machina campaign, it was over 370 hours. So people spent a lot of time with those characters, and you got to really see the arcs on the show. But now we're sort of like rewinding and seeing where the characters had to grow from to even get to where the show started.
Right.
So it's really fun going back and sort of seeding hints for things that'll happen later, like relationships that will start, like how do these people react to each other the first time they meet?
Right.
You know, getting to play with things like that and just flesh out the characters even more that are so beloved and already built, and just sort of seeing where they came from. It's an interesting kind of freedom.
Right. Some of my favorite small moments from the Critical Role comics right now are just those really small interactions between Vax and Keyleth, when it's just kind of hinting to their relationship that bloomed over the course of the show. And right now it's just them kind of just like maybe like a look a little bit too long at each other or something like that. It's really just like, oh, that's it. It's nice. It's just nice as a fan to see that kind of stuff just really be tied together.
Yeah, and it's fun to get to do like and they're in combat. So obviously, like Vex and Percy as the two ranged fighters will be, you know, side by side.
Jeez.
Yep.
So. Yep. Exactly. Well, David, switching to you, there's something that actually Jody said that I kind of want to ask you about, talking about the constraints of working on a show comic tie-in, and is that experience different from you being both a writer on the Orville, the show, and getting through the comics where Jody maybe on Stranger Things has to be a little more like, can I do this? Can I not do this? Do you feel like you have to go to somebody to ask those questions? Or
I don't. I know the answers. So that, for instance, I had an enormous amount of freedom in the first 4 issues I did, because the idea of the idea of the comic is it takes place between seasons.
Right.
And I knew that the comics were going to come out after the second season had been on the air.
Right.
So that even these that first set of 4 comics that I did took place between seasons 1 and season 2, but I knew I could like talk about things that had happened in season 2. So for instance, I introduced in the comics, Kelly had a boyfriend at the beginning of season 2, the Adrienne Pilecki character. And so I show how they met. Bortis and Clyden have a child in season 1 that is much older. In season 2, we don't explain it, but I explained it in the comic. Right. And these were things that, you know, sometimes I would just mention to Seth, I'm going to do this. And he's like, oh, great. That's great. That's a great explanation, or whatever, you know, but I understood what I could do very clearly, what the constraints were. Now the comics that I'm doing takes place between seasons 2 and season 3. There's been a delay because of COVID of season 3 coming out. I know everything that happens in season 3, and I can't get near any of it.
Right.
I can't even hint at it. There's nothing, I hate to say this because I think people are reading the comics hoping for clues of things in season 3. There is nothing in the Orville comics that in any way hints at anything happening in season 3. We have a lot of big surprises coming, a lot of really great stuff. Season 3 is a barn burner of a season. I was trapped to create comics that didn't get near any of this great stuff that's coming in season 3. And that ended up being the exact opposite experience that I had with the first 4, where I can help explain things. And, but so does that answer your question, right?
That definitely answers the question. Yeah. That's super interesting.
Yeah.
Kind of tying into that, what are the constraints or freedoms of writing for the comic versus the show? Do you find yourself being able to maybe do things in the comic that you're not able to in the show?
Well, yeah, I mean, there are two things come to mind. One, it's a place for all the story ideas I couldn't convince Seth to do. So that's positive for me. I get to do them.
Sure.
The other piece, though, for me is that as a comic book reader, what I always found, a big Star Trek fan, what I always found disappointing about Star Trek comics back in the day, I think there are a lot of new ones now that really do this, and I really enjoy. Year 5 is one I was just talking to Jody about, but it's not a Dark Horse title, so I don't want to. But back in the day, as a kid, what drove me crazy about tie-in stuff is it didn't feel like the show. So my goal as one of the Orville writers is that the comic feel like an episode. And so, for instance, I never have thought bubbles. I never have extended explanations of things in stage direction, or captions, very brief captions. I want people to feel this thing is unfolding in front of them, and so that's really important to me as the comic writer, is that I'm also a comic reader, and I've gotten that compliment from some people that, oh, it feels like an episode of the show. That's exactly my goal, is that these 2 issues feel like, oh, that could have been an episode, and that goes back to me as a comic fan,
right?
Specifically Star Trek comics, which I always read, I collected, and was always disappointed as a kid,
right? I guess, and this is for each of you, kind of talking about going back and forth between the different mediums these stories are told in. Do you see your work impacting the whole, like the project as a whole? Like the work you do in the comics, do you see that reflected or hints of it reflected in like Stranger Things? And I mean, Critical Role is a little bit different, but in Plants vs. Zombies and David, in the Orville, like do you have the cast reference the comics when they're going to shoot the new season?
No.
Okay.
I also take this attitude. It's the comics are canon until they're not.
Sure.
That's the, that you're in production of a show, things happen, things change. Suddenly you're realizing, you're doing something and it's like not working, or you're going down a road with something and you throw it out. And the dominant thing here is the television show.
Right.
The Orville comic is an adjunct to that. And hopefully fans of the show enjoy the comic. But one doesn't, the comics don't, tail doesn't wag the dog.
Right.
That's just the attitude I have. And again, because Orville's not my show, it's Seth's show.
Right.
I work closely with him, but sometimes, I can't control what he's going to come up with. And I'm trying to stay within that realm so that it feels like the comic feels like it's also Seth's show.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, I think Stranger Things is pretty much the same, except I'm not working on the show itself. I'm just strictly on the comics, so I don't even have the same connection there that David does. So yeah, it is very much about meeting the needs of the showrunners and the show writers, and doing what will fit in the world that they're building, rather than trying to throw something in that, oh, they'll definitely want to run with this. That's not my job. So,
Right.
Yeah.
Do it to some degree we've done it to some degree on Plants vs. Zombies. Like I created the town of Neighborville, and the last Plants vs. Zombies game was Battle for Neighborville. So,
Oh, that's great.
So yeah, we do move some stuff in. We keep talking about, there's a little zombie hedgehog named Mr. Stubbins that we're going to probably move into the games, or they're going to probably move into the games. So yeah, the game makers at this point now consider the comics as to be the proper Plants vs. Zombies feel. So that's kind of nice. Yeah. And I'm seeing more of my world kind of move into the games. So, and they talk to me when they're starting the games. So yeah, it's nice.
Yeah, that is nice.
Yeah.
Nice,
like when I was doing Witcher, it was the same as like what David and Jody were saying. It was like,
right.
I had to be true to the novels to a certain extent and be true to the games a little more. And there were always things of like, oh, that's a good idea, but it just kind of, it comes up against this wall, and our wall is the wall. So
Yep. No, that totally makes sense.
The actors on Orville, however, do love seeing themselves in comic book form.
Sure.
They've
Sure.
gotten a lot of compliments on that, and I didn't do anything. I hadn't do anything about that. That's the artist, David Cabeza, but I'll take the compliment. But
Yeah, sure.
Sure. I always take the compliment.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no, I remember that great signing we did. Was that New York Comic Con 2019?
Yes, and all the actors were signing comics. It was great.
Yeah.
I remember that one.
Yeah, no, I had a great conversation with Jay Lee. He was super just stoked.
Super excited. He does
see
like
the
a
comic,
video.
yeah.
He does a video of him, or he did a bunch of Instagram posts of him going to the comic shop to buy the way I have it here, but to buy this one, which has him on the cover. Look, I'm on the cover of comic books.
That's awesome. I know Matthew Modine for Stranger Things similarly is a huge fan of the Stranger Things comics, which is super cool. We've done a signing with him. Jody, I believe you were there.
Yeah. I did a signing with him out here in LA, actually, at a local comic shop, and it was everyone was coming up and just talking about non-Stranger Things with him, which I don't think has ever happened at a comic signing.
Right.
That I'm in it generally. But yeah, it was cool, and he's always tweeting about the comic, showing off the cover. I think he's done some giveaway of signed comics, but yeah, because the second series we did 6, which dealt with another one of the kids in the program that 11 was. That first issue had him just looming over everything on the cover. So yeah, I think he was a fan of that.
Yeah, that's super cool. How do each of you approach the work when you're coming into working on like a licensed property, like what you're currently working on? Do you how much homework do you do, I guess, is what the question I'm asking before getting into actually like page one scripting?
I try to do the least amount of homework as possible.
My man. Paul, my man.
I don't know, to a certain degree, I like to establish like some boundaries, and after that, I kind of like to just wing it. Because
Sure.
I don't necessarily, the ones that I've done, I don't necessarily want to recreate. Like David was talking about wanting to recreate the show, and I would probably feel that way if I was doing a show, but mine have been games. And I don't think there's any way to recreate a game in a comic. So I wanted my stuff to be completely new. And I think that the way you do that is to put your own personal stamp on it, but
Right.
do it within the boxes that have been established. It's just like, let's explore, like Jody was talking about, like she has all these boxes, but she finds characters that she wants to explore more. And I think that's fascinating. So I find aspects of the characters or aspects of the world that I want to explore more. That's what I was doing on Witcher, but for Plants vs. Zombies, it was just like, for that, I really just needed to know what certain zombies and plants look like. So I keep the game kind of handy, the very first game kind of handy when I'm writing, and I'm like, oh, I'll bring that up and go, I haven't used a buckethead zombie for a while. Let's use a buckethead zombie and things like that. So, but research can, for me, like, I've read so many things where I can tell that somebody has researched it to death and then sat down to write and went, and now I must put all my research into this.
Sure.
And then it just becomes a very cold recitation of,
Right.
yes, I'm aware of this,
Yes.
of this thing.
Yeah,
And
sure.
where I want to dive into a world. So
Yep.
Yeah,
I've
I
read
would
books like
say,
that.
yeah, research is one of the best ways to procrastinate, and I don't want to fall into that hole. As I avoid it as much as I can, so I try to let the story guide the research. Like, I don't need to know everything that happened or every detail about this character. I just need to know as much as the story demands.
Right.
And I think for me, especially with things like Stranger Things and Critical Role, the homework I'll do while I'm in the midst is just go back and listen to snippets of the characters to make sure I'm being consistent with the voices and that they
Right.
sound like the characters they are. But like one of the other projects I did with Dark Horse was StarCraft, which was all original characters. So for that, it was just, here's the basic framework I need to know of how the world works and these different organizations we're going to be touching on, but they're all new characters. So, I don't want to spend so much time that they just feel like rehashes of things that have come before. I want to focus on building up those characters as new and unique people in this world.
Right. Well, kids, the big takeaway from that is research is just procrastination. So don't do it.
It's interesting listening to Jody and Paul, because you would think I don't do any research because I work on the show, so I know everything. And it's the exact opposite. I agree with both of them, because I am always I can get really kind of locked in with, all right, we're doing this over here on the show, we're doing this over here. I got to fit it right in here. And I think I'm wrong to do that, because I don't know that anybody's noticing what I'm noticing. And that's a version of research of, well, this episode took this number of months, and this episode took this number of weeks and whatever. And that kind of thing really locks you up, and I think I agree with Jody, it's kind of a form of procrastination. It's like fear of my own sort of creativity, putting something down that might be terrible. And so that I agree. I think, and then again, talking what Paul's talking about, when on other projects where I've been doing research, it really, like, you feel some kind of crazy responsibility to let everybody know all the work you've done, and that's not why they're there. That's not what they're there for. They're there for the story, the characters, the fun, and you've got to not let yourself get locked up in that.
Oh yeah, continuity can definitely be its own kind of trap, because
Right.
you can just get really into the minutia, and part of it's like you want to show everyone how smart you are, because like
Right.
you found all these puzzle pieces and look how perfectly this fits in.
They don't care.
Yeah, they don't care. I mean, they'll
Right.
care if you get it wrong, and then you'll hear
That's
about
true.
it.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's why I really liked you talking about, like, letting the story, like, dictate the research, because sometimes you'll be telling a story that you want to tell and you'll be really into it, and then you're like, well, I want to use this one character, and then it's like, wait, where'd that character work in this aspect, things like that. So you find those little moments of, okay, now I need to actually make sure of this part, but otherwise just let the story be the key.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And if something's really off, the people who work on the license side will let you know.
Right. Right.
They will.
I mean, to go back to something, David, you said earlier, it's canon until it's not, right? So just if it serves the story, then that's what's canon for the story.
Right.
Which I feel like some of my favorite things are very much like that. Not to talk about non-Dark Horse stuff extensively, but all the old X-Men movies from the early 2000s, each movie was just like, do you kind of remember what happened in the last one? That's all you need to know going in. Like, there's no real sense of continuity except for if you have a vague memory of what the last one was. And they're able to just tell whatever story they want to tell to varying degrees of success. But yeah, very cool. Don't remember where I was going with that, so we'll just move on. Well, you were all obviously prolific, successful, lauded writers in your own right. Pre-recording, we were having an extensive conversation about a myriad of things, but David wrote the biography for James T. Kirk, which then Jody used when she was writing
autobiography.
Autobiography, excuse me, the autobiography for James T. Kirk, which then Jody used when she was writing her run on her Star Trek comics, and it's just, there's nice synchronicity there. But what's your dream property to write for? If you have a dream property to write for, if there's one thing that you're like, I want to write that, I want to leave my mark on that, what would it be?
That's a good question.
That's tough for me because they're all creator owned. I like doing creator owned.
I think, it's funny. There's a lot of the. I've been enjoying the James Bond comics, and I don't know that I've ever thought that I want to write for that property, but that style of comic of the '60s spy thing, sort of harking back to that classic James Bond, the early James Bond. That's something, I guess, that I would, if I had to pick one, that would be something I would love to write for.
I'm working on so many things I love. There's definitely some of the superhero stuff that I love that I grew up with. I haven't gotten to play with yet. A weird one for me, and it already sort of got rebooted, so I don't know if it would ever happen, but I always had this concept I really wanted to reboot Rainbow Bright.
Okay.
Oh, really?
Because, if you look at her power set, she's kind of a Green Lantern, and I just thought it would be interesting to show galactic war hero Rainbow Bright and just sort of make her a full-on superhero, just with fellow children and rainbows everywhere. So.
Yeah,
great idea. You could sell that as a movie. That's it, or a TV
for
show.
real. Whoever owns that license, let Jody write that.
Dynamite's been doing it most recently, along with the James Bond comics, which I wrote one of once. So
you wrote one of the James Bond comics?
I wrote a Money Penny special.
Oh, I read those. Those were great.
Oh, thank you.
Given it more thought, I wouldn't mind doing Johnny Quest, that old cartoon.
Oh, yeah.
Sure.
That would be a blast.
Yeah. Speaking of creator-owned stuff, everybody should read Colder. Colder is great. It's terrifying, but great. It's not at all like Plants vs. Zombies. If you're a child, don't read it. Well, very cool. Before we close this out, where can people find you?
Me, I'm on Twitter, just Paul Tobin on Twitter. That's the only social media I really do. It's the only one I really have time for.
I'm on Twitter at Jody_Houser and on Instagram at Mind Eclipse, and I'm hoping to delve into some more stuff in other mediums, but anytime I do, it'll be, talked about there first. So
I'm very hard to get in touch with. I'm on Twitter, but I only really do jokes on Twitter. I don't really engage with people who follow my work, but it's David A. Goodman at David A. Goodman. But I guess I should make more of an effort to be available.
There's an aloofness that comes with just kind of making jokes and leaving.
Right.
Yeah. Well, thank you all very much for joining me for this panel today. You have all been wonderful. This has been a lot of fun for me personally. Anything you want to leave our audience at home with? Any advice for surviving maybe another year of the pandemic or not?
Support your local comic shops. They especially need it after last year. And if you end up getting stuck at home for a little while longer, you'll have plenty of great stuff to read.
There you go.
What Jody said. I agree.
You want to be a writer, and you're writing, and it's coming really easy, and it's flowing. You're writing bad stuff. Writing's hard. You want to be a writer. Focus on making sure that thing you're writing is the best thing you've ever read. You're your first audience. That's my advice.
That's really good advice. Mine, I'm just going to take from this conversation we've had over the past 40 minutes is don't do homework, research is procrastination, and play video games, and everything will work out.
Yeah.
I'm feeling very good about this panel.
Thank you, everybody. This has been Dark Horse Comics from page to screen, screen to page. I'm Anthony Mauro. I'll let my panelists sign off in their own ways.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks
Paul
for
Tobin, Jody Houser,
A lot
David
of fun.
Goodman. Bye, everybody.
Yeah.